This time, Nature Inc. goes to the peaks of the Andes, to the icebound landscapes where the Inca Indians believed the gods lived. But there's a big difference. Their icy realm is vanishing fast as climate change melts the glaciers. Nature Inc. goes to Bolivia and Peru and finds the impact is already being felt on those countries' economies. But is worse to come, and what is the cost? What, if anything, is anyone doing to cope with climate change? For 200 years, the free market has dominated global economic thinking, but it left something vital off the books: the services nature provides to the whole human race. In 2003, scientists valued those services at $33 trillion a year. Nature Inc. asks what would happen if governments and big business had to pay for what nature provides us for free. Welcome to Nature Inc., the series that explores the economic contribution of ecosystems to the balance sheet. We are in the Andes as Nature Inc.'s test case for the warnings to the international community that unless investments are made now, climate change is going to cost the global economy dear. One study commissioned by the Andean Community of Nations indicates that in less than 20 years, climate change could be lopping off nearly 5% of the Andean nation's GDP. Other studies indicate that climate change is happening faster in these mountains than anywhere else in the world. It's a cruel irony that nations such as these, which have contributed least, are among the first to suffer from the changes.
Latin America has only 8% of the world population, and the impact of the greenhouse gases are only 5% in all Latin America.
One of the reasons for the rapid acceptance in business and government circles of the economic cost of climate change was the so-called Stern Report. The former chief advisor to the British government crunched the numbers. He produced a report in 2006 that argued that a 1% of GDP investment now in measures to combat and adapt to climate change could save the global economy between 3% and 10% by 2050. It could also avoid social breakdown in the poorest communities in the front line against climate change. Nature Inc. went to two Andean countries, Peru and Bolivia, to test the Stern thesis. 40 million people in the Andean region rely on these glaciers, their vast water towers, releasing an all-year-round supply for farming, for drinking water, for factories and power. According to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC reports, these glaciers, like glaciers throughout the tropical belt, are in headlong retreat, and scientific evidence is backed by what the eye can see. According to the University of the Pacific in Peru, this melt could cost the Andean nations an estimated $30 billion in reduced energy, food and water supplies. According to another study, the percentage of the population that has problems getting a clean and reliable water supply could rise to 70% in 2025. At 5,300 metres above sea level, the ski resort on the Chacaltaya Glacier in Bolivia used to be billed as the world's highest ski resort. Over the last 25 years, it has melted to a mere sliver. Any new snow melts within hours of the sun beating on it. The once thriving Chacaltaya ski resort has been reduced to an empty windblown hut. Glaciologist Dr. Edson Ramirez is one of the leading authorities on the loss of glaciers in this region, and his prognosis for this glacier is bleak.
I think that the glacier will disappear in the next year. For example, the thickness of the glacier, it's just 2 or 3 meters.
Oh, in Chacaltaya, it was great because we were young people, we were 15 years old, and the snow was great. Then the weather started changing. During the season, the snow was less and less and less.
Hugo Berrios Martin operates a mountaineering centre at the neighbouring glacier, Huyana Potosi. He has lived in the area since he was a boy and now runs a mountaineering centre which caters for around 2,000 intrepid tourists a year, almost a third of the entire business of the whole area.
There's a lot of families who live from the mountain. If there's no ice, if there's no mountain, they will be starving.
So tourism here is retreating along with the glaciers, a small-scale impact of climate change, and perhaps a foretaste of devastating environmental change underway. For the critical role these glaciers play is to provide a stable supply of drinking water to the Bolivian cities of La Paz and El Alto.
We can estimate that the glaciers in the summer months, in the process of the melting of the glaciers, they can contribute up to 30 to 35% of the capacity of production of our reservoirs.
Together, these cities are home to almost 2 million people. Already, half the population in both cities has no access to a clean supply of water. They have to rely on local wells, but these are already overstretched and polluted.
With the shortage of water, we have quite big problems because sometimes there's water and sometimes there's not. And sometimes the water is cloudy and it's not always good to get water from the well. At night, sometimes the water level goes down, so we take it out in the morning and store it.
If the glacial melt to the reservoirs vanishes, the supply to those who are lucky enough to have access to communal taps like this one may dry up. Farmers too are in the front line. Glaciers store water and release it for an all-year-round supply. If the Andes loses the glaciers, the farmers will lose these water taps. Already on the rugged slopes of the Andes, farmers say their hardships are increasing. Pedro Signani is the only one of 4 brothers who has not quit the Bolivian Altiplano for the shantytowns. Pedro and his neighbour Salsapaki Locre say the climate is becoming more unpredictable.
We've been seeing severe changes in the climate. If we get hailstorms, we can lose our entire crops. And there's other times where the rains are very heavy and it ruins the earth, and we can lose all our harvests.
Our harvests have been affected by frosts, hail, blights, and so we have very little to sell. And when we have very little to sell, there's very little for my children.
Bolivia's farmers make up a third of the population and account for up to 15% of GDP. But there are no precise numbers on the exodus, still less on how much can be ascribed to man-made climate change. But there is no doubt that the influx of the rural poor is overburdening the urban areas.
The city of El Alto, which 30 years ago had only around 20,000 inhabitants, now has more than 900,000, largely as a result of rural migration, and the effects of climate change are contributing even more to these figures.
This influx is putting added pressure on the city's already stretched water resources and strained infrastructure. Recent studies by the World Bank have estimated neighbouring Ecuador's city of Quito, with a similar population size as El Alto and La Paz together, around 2 million people, would need to spend around $100 million in today's money in additional costs to meet the water needs of an expanding urban population.
Water is not only a natural resource. Water is much more critical than oil, because with oil, you just drive a car. With water, if you don't have water, you die. Several experts are talking now that the next critical resource war would be around water. If we don't address this issue, the political, social, and economic implications will go much, much more beyond a single figure of $100, $200, $400, or $600 million. It's a conflict. And conflicts are way too expensive to even think about how much they will cost in nominal terms.